The water rushed across my lower field like a military invasion, deliberate and destructive. I stood in the pouring rain, watching helplessly as 3 generations of my family's legacy drowned before my eyes. My prize calves, descendants of my father's original herd, struggled against the current before going still. Through the downpour, I could see them standing there on the hill above my property, watching. Karen Whitfield, HOA president, actually smiled as she observed the devastation, the drainage pipes they had illegally installed performing exactly as designed. "Maybe now you will sell that eyesore ranch," she called out, her voice carrying over the storm. The county commissioner beside her nodded in agreement, both sheltered under a large umbrella emblazoned with their development's logo. I had served my country honorably for 40 years, commanded troops in 4 conflict zones, and negotiated with hostile foreign powers. I never expected my greatest battle would be fought on my own soil, against my own neighbors, with my own government actively working against me. In that moment, I made a decision they would soon regret. They had no idea who they were dealing with. After 40 years of distinguished military service, I believed my battles were behind me. 4 stars on my uniform and citations covering an entire wall meant little compared to the peace I sought in retirement. The ancestral ranch, 350 acres of rolling Texas pastures, had been in my family for 5 generations. Coming home to this land was coming full circle, a return to the place where I learned the values that guided my career. The early autumn sunlight washed over the weathered barn and modest farmhouse as I settled into my new civilian routine. Each morning began with coffee on the east porch, watching the sunrise illuminate fields where my great-grandfather had taught my grandfather to ride, who taught my father, who taught me. The military precision remained only in my morning routine and meticulously organized workshop, where I spent hours restoring the antique tractor my father had left behind. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after I moved back. Official-looking envelope, corporate letterhead, addressed to property owner rather than General James Harrison. It informed me that the neighboring luxury development, Whitfield Estates, had established a homeowners association that claimed jurisdiction over certain aesthetic standards affecting their community. Enclosed was a list of violations on my property visible from their development. I read the letter twice, then set it aside. Surely a mistake. My property had been established decades before their development broke ground. I had been briefed during the property transfer that the massive housing project was coming, but no mention had been made of any authority over my land. The second letter arrived a week later, more stern in tone. It referenced continued noncompliance and suggested potential fines. This time I drove the perimeter of my property, checking the boundary markers against county maps. Everything appeared in order. My ranch remained separate from their jurisdiction. The first major rainstorm revealed the truth. Water pooled in my lower fields at levels I had never seen in all my years growing up on this land. I watched from my porch as small streams formed, then merged, then swelled into concerning volumes flowing directly toward my livestock areas. By morning, the water had risen to the lower fence lines, something that had never happened naturally in the ranch's history. I followed the water's path upstream, hiking along the property line until I found what I suspected. Newly installed drainage pipes, industrial grade and substantial, directed water flow from the development straight toward my property. They had effectively redirected their water management issues onto my land. I called the county planning office immediately. I need to report unpermitted drainage modifications affecting my property. The response was not what I expected. "Mr. Harrison, those modifications were approved last quarter. The Whitfield development submitted proper documentation without notifying the adjacent property owner. That is my land they are flooding. The uncomfortable pause spoke volumes. Perhaps you should speak with the HOA directly, sir. We just processed the paperwork. That afternoon, I drove to the development's community center. The contrast between my mud-splattered truck and the immaculate grounds was intentional. I wanted them to see exactly what their drainage was doing to my property. Corinne Whitfield, HOA president, received me in her office. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer outfit, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "General Harrison, is it? What can we do for you today?" "Your drainage system is flooding my ranch. I need it addressed immediately." Her smile remained fixed as she leaned back in her chair. Our drainage was professionally designed to protect our community. If you are experiencing water issues, perhaps your land needs better water management. My land had perfect water management for over a century, until your pipes started dumping onto my property. She stood, indicating our meeting was over. The development has all necessary permits. If you have concerns about your outdated ranch handling modern water flow, perhaps you should consider updating your own infrastructure, or selling to developers who can properly maintain the land. As I left, I noticed the photographs on her wall. Corinne with the county commissioner, Corinne with the district judge, Corinne with state representatives. This would not be a simple fight. But then again, I had never sought out simple fights. The following morning, I awoke before dawn. Military habits die hard. By sunrise, I had transformed my father's old study into a command center. Maps of property lines covered one wall while aerial photos of the development in my ranch lay spread across the desk. The water damage was clearly visible even from these images, darker soil showing where unnatural pooling had occurred. I began documentation with the thoroughness that had defined my career. Photographs of standing water, damaged fencing, and muddy conditions threatening my livestock filled a dedicated folder. Soil samples from both flooded and unflooded areas went into labeled containers. I recorded water flow measurements and marked the exact locations where their drainage emptied onto my property. My research expanded beyond physical evidence. Public records revealed Corinne Whitfield's concerning history, 3 previous communities where her aggressive management style had led to lawsuits and neighbor disputes. Somehow, she had emerged unscathed each time, often leaving when things became uncomfortable, only to establish herself in a position of authority at the next location. More troubling were her connections. Her husband, Richard Whitfield, appeared in numerous photographs with local officials, golf outings with the county commissioner, fundraisers with the district judge, charitable events with planning board members. They had built an effective network of influence in the 2 years since breaking ground on their development. I decided to observe their operations directly. The monthly HOA meeting was open to the public according to their website. I dressed in nondescript civilian attire, pressed khakis, and a button-down shirt, nothing that would reveal my military background. I sat quietly in the back of their community center, observing as a stranger among manicured homeowners in designer clothes. Item 5 on our agenda, Corinne announced with practiced authority. Water Management Phase 2. A man in an expensive suit stood and displayed technical drawings. As you can see, the initial drainage system has performed admirably in protecting our properties. Phase 2 will extend this protection to the northwest sector. I studied the diagrams with growing concern. The northwest sector bordered directly on my most vulnerable acreage. They were planning to increase water diversion toward my property. What about the impact on adjacent land? A younger homeowner asked. I noticed significant pooling on the ranch property during the last storm. Karen's dismissive laugh echoed through the room. The old-timer with the junkyard ranch. That property has been poorly maintained for decades. Our development has actually increased local property values despite his refusal to modernize. Several board members snickered as she continued. Our homes are simply too valuable to risk any water damage. The county has approved our plans, and we have the right to protect our investments. I remained silent, gathering intelligence rather than engaging. After the meeting adjourned, I overheard Karen speaking with the project engineer near the refreshment table. Make sure those additional drains are installed before the spring rains, she instructed, and have the landscaping team ready to disguise the outflows. No need to draw attention to the technical aspects. The engineer nodded. What about the property line concerns? Just stay within 6 inches of the line, she responded. He cannot prove exactly where water crosses boundaries during natural rainfall. I departed unnoticed, but her words confirmed my suspicions. This was not accidental. This was calculated. The next morning, I conducted a thorough inspection of my property line at dawn. Dew still clung to the grass as I walked the boundary, measuring distances and comparing to survey markers. What I discovered sent a chill through me despite the warming day. Their drainage pipes already extended several feet onto my land without permission or notification. I photographed every encroachment, measuring precisely with military accuracy. Some pipes had been partially concealed with transplanted vegetation, others simply buried under a thin layer of soil. The deliberate nature of these installations was unmistakable. They knew exactly what they were doing. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the evidence. My father would have confronted them directly, demanded immediate action. But 4 decades of military strategy had taught me the value of proper preparation before engagement. I would approach this methodically, with discipline and documentation. Phase 1, I murmured to myself, organizing the evidence files. Diplomatic channels. I prepared my initial communication with the same precision I once used for official military correspondence. The formal letter, typed on personal letterhead, referenced specific county ordinances regarding water rights and property encroachment. I included precisely 3 photographs, enough to demonstrate the issue without revealing the full extent of my documentation. My request was reasonable and direct. Address the drainage issue and remove illegal pipes from my property within 30 days. The certified mail receipt confirmed delivery. Their response arrived exactly 1 week later, 5 pages of legal language on law firm letterhead. I read it carefully at my kitchen table, noting the contradictions and threats woven throughout the text. While we sympathize with your water management challenges, the letter stated, our development has complied with all county regulations. The alleged flooding is merely the natural water flow pattern of the area, which your property has failed to accommodate through modern drainage techniques. They had transformed their aggression into my failure, classic tactical maneuver. More concerning was the counterattack. Furthermore, the current condition of your property constitutes a significant negative impact on surrounding property values. Your failure to modernize basic infrastructure and maintain aesthetic standards creates a demonstrable financial burden on the entire community. The letter ended with their own demand, that I construct proper drainage on my land at my expense, effectively accepting responsibility for managing their water runoff. I set the letter aside and made 2 phone calls. The first to Martin Webb, a land surveyor I had served with decades earlier. the second to Dr. Eliner Chen, a hydrologist specializing in environmental impact studies. Both agreed to conduct independent assessments. Their reports confirmed what I already knew. Martin's survey documented multiple instances of property line encroachment, while Dr. Chen's analysis demonstrated conclusively that the water flow patterns had been artificially altered to direct drainage toward my property. Armed with expert testimony, I attended the next HOA meeting. I waited patiently for the public comment period, then approached the microphone with my folder of evidence. My name is James Harrison. I own the adjacent ranch property. I am here to address the water diversion that is damaging my land. Corinne Whitfield's eyes narrowed slightly as she recognized me. Mr. Harrison, we have already responded to your concerns in writing. General Harrison, I corrected calmly. And yes, I received your response. However, I now have independent verification that your drainage modifications are causing significant damage to my property. I began methodically presenting the evidence. The survey showing encroachment. The hydrologist's report documenting deliberate water diversion. Photographs of standing water where none had existed before. Halfway through my presentation, Corinne interrupted, dramatically pointing toward the floor. Excuse me, but you are tracking mud across our newly renovated community center floor. All eyes turned toward my boots. In my focus on the evidence, I had neglected to notice the soil still clinging from my morning inspection rounds. The room erupted in murmurs as Corinne added loudly, "This is exactly the kind of mess we are trying to protect ourselves from." Several board members openly laughed. One whispered audibly, "Typical ranch trash." If you had proper pathways on your property, Corinne continued, perhaps you would not be tracking filth everywhere you go. This rather perfectly illustrates our concerns about your property standards. My decades of military discipline prevented me from responding emotionally. I simply continued presenting the evidence, though it was clear the board had already dismissed my concerns. When I finished, Corinne smiled thinly. "Thank you for your comments. We will take them under advisement." That was all, no commitment, no action, just dismissal. 3 days later, the spring storm hit. Rain fell continuously for 36 hours, saturating the already compromised ground. I watched from my porch as water rose across my lower pasture, flowing exactly as Dr. Chen had predicted based on the artificial drainage patterns. By morning, the devastation was clear. Water had surged across the paddock where my small herd of cattle sought shelter. 3 prize calves, descendants of my father's original bloodline, lay lifeless in the receding water. Mud and debris had undermined the historic barn's foundation, causing structural damage to a building that had weathered a century of natural elements until human interference changed everything. I stood in the center of my property, rain still falling lightly, surveying the destruction. This was no longer about property rights or water management. This was about deliberate harm to my livelihood and heritage. In that moment, something shifted within me. The diplomatic approach had failed. It was time for more decisive action. The morning after the flood, I documented everything with military precision. Each drowned calf, photographed from multiple angles. The barn foundation damage, measured and recorded. Water lines marked on structures and fences. Soil samples taken from multiple locations showing saturation levels and contamination patterns. My insurance adjuster arrived that afternoon, a former Army Ranger named Mike Donnelly who recognized my name immediately. He moved through the property methodically, taking his own photographs and measurements. "Between us, sir," he said when we were alone near the damaged barn. "This was no act of God. Those drainage pipes were aimed at your property like artillery." His official report would take weeks, but he left me with a handshake and knowing look. "Document everything, General, every single detail." 2 days later, the insurance company's official letter arrived. Claim denied. The reasons cited: ongoing neighbor dispute and pre-existing drainage issues. So the HOA had connections within the insurance industry as well. I drove into town the following morning to consult with Thomas Hargrove, the only attorney within 50 miles. His small office above the pharmacy was lined with fishing trophies and law books in equal measure. He listened carefully to my situation, reviewing the evidence I had gathered. "This is thorough work, General Harrison," he said, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Military precision, but I have to be honest with you." He shifted uncomfortably. "Corinne's husband golfs weekly with both the county commissioner and Judge Reynolds. They have fought this battle before. 3 years ago, an elderly couple on the east side tried to fight their drainage issues. The Whitfields simply exhausted their resources and resolve. They destroyed my property," I stated firmly. "Killed my livestock. This cannot stand." Hargrove nodded slowly. "I understand your position, sir, but this is not a battlefield with clear enemies. This is small-town politics with handshake deals and long-time relationships. They have the resources to drag this out for years." I thanked him for his candor and left with a clearer understanding of the battlefield. This was not simply a matter of right and wrong. This was about power and influence. That afternoon, while purchasing supplies at the general store, I overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. "Did you hear about the rancher causing problems with Whitfield Estates?" one asked. "Corinne told me he had some kind of episode at their meeting," the other responded. "Something about military PTSD. Started ranting about conspiracy theories." "Well, what do you expect from someone living alone on that rundown property?" "Richard told my husband they might need to involve the county for a mental health check if his behavior continues." I selected my items in silence, paying at the counter without engaging. The character assassination had begun, a calculated effort to discredit me before I could effectively challenge them. To all appearances, I retreated. I stopped filing complaints. I declined to attend further HOA meetings. When development residents drove past my property, I simply nodded politely but distantly, appearing to have accepted my losses. When Corinne herself drove slowly past my fence line one evening, I was sitting on my porch, seemingly staring into the distance. She rolled down her window. "General Harrison," she called out, "I hope you are doing better. We were all concerned about your intensity at the meeting." I nodded without speaking. "If you find maintaining this property is becoming too much for you," she continued with artificial sympathy, "we know several buyers who might be interested. Not full market value, of course, given the condition, but enough to help you relocate somewhere more manageable." "I will think about it," I replied simply. She drove away satisfied, believing she had won. But inside my home, a different strategy was developing. That evening, I removed the secure satellite phone I had maintained from my service days from its locked case. 4 decades of military service creates connections that run deeper than local politics. I made exactly 3 calls. The first to Colonel Margaret Chen, my former aide-de-camp who now worked with the Environmental Protection Agency's Enforcement Division. The second to Major Williams, a satellite imagery specialist with contacts throughout federal surveying agencies. The third to Captain Jack Roberts, an environmental engineer who had served under my command during multiple overseas infrastructure projects. "I need your expertise," I told each of them, "not as a favor to me, but in service to environmental protection and legal compliance." A strategic withdrawal is not the same as surrender. It is preparation for a more decisive engagement. Colonel Margaret Chen arrived first, her government rental car pulling into my driveway exactly 1 week after my call. To any observer, she appeared to be nothing more than a concerned friend visiting a retired colleague. The environmental testing equipment concealed in her trunk told a different story. "General Harrison," she said with a crisp salute that melted into a warm hug, "it has been too long." I showed her to the guest room that had once belonged to my parents. "Thank you for coming, Margaret." "When you call, we answer," she replied simply. "Always." By week's end, 5 more visitors had taken rooms at the local inn, all former members of my command structure, each bringing specific expertise and connections. We gathered in my barn, the damaged section cordoned off, the central area transformed into an operations center with maps, computers, and surveillance equipment. "Satellite imagery confirms it," Major Williams explained, pointing to high-resolution terrain maps displayed on his laptop. "The entire luxury development sits on what was once designated wetlands. These comparison images show the original watershed patterns before construction began." Captain Roberts nodded, adding his findings. "The environmental impact studies they filed with the county show water flowing northeast into the natural drainage basin, but our ground testing confirms all actual drainage has been diverted northwest, directly onto your property." "Most concerning," added Lieutenant Commander Peterson, now with the Army Corps of Engineers, "are these modifications to the flood zone maps. These changes could only have occurred through deliberate manipulation or bribery of officials. The timestamps on the digital files show alterations occurred after initial approval." For 3 days, my team conducted methodical tests and surveillance. Water samples revealed concerning levels of construction chemicals and lawn treatments flowing from the development onto protected watershed areas. Soil cores showed contamination patterns consistent with intentional water diversion. Ground-penetrating radar identified buried drainage structures extending well beyond permitted boundaries. "This is far worse than a neighbor dispute," Colonel Chen concluded during our 3rd evening briefing. "This is systematic environmental violation with potential public health implications." "The water contamination alone violates 4 federal statutes," Commander Peterson added. "The Clean Water Act applies regardless of local political connections." While my team gathered evidence, I maintained my appearance of defeat. I tended my remaining livestock, repaired what fencing I could, and nodded distantly when development residents drove past. The facade was essential, giving the HOA board confidence that their intimidation had succeeded. Corinne Whitfield drove past my property every evening that week, slowing to observe my activities. On Friday, she finally stopped, rolling down her window to call out to me as I mended a fence post. "General Harrison, our board has been discussing your situation. We feel terrible about the storm damage." I straightened, wiping my hands on a rag. "Do you now?" "These things happen with older properties," she continued. "Without proper modern drainage systems, you really are at the mercy of the elements." I remained silent, letting her fill the conversation. "Several of our investors have expressed interest in your property," she said, her voice casual but her eyes calculating. "We could offer you $600,000. Not market value, of course, but enough to help you find a nice retirement condo somewhere more comfortable. The property was worth well over $2 million. Her insult was intentional, a final push to break me. That is quite generous, I replied neutrally. I will consider it. Her smile widened, victory apparent in her expression. Wonderful, I will have papers drawn up. No rush, of course. Take the weekend to think it over. As her luxury SUV pulled away, Major Williams approached from the barn. Surveillance recorded the entire conversation, sir. Classic predatory tactics. Indeed, I agreed. And now we know their timeline. They want this resolved quickly. Inside my home that evening, we finalized our strategy. Colonel Chen prepared detailed evidence packages for her contacts at the Environmental Protection Agency. Major Williams compiled geographic information system data demonstrating the wetlands violations. Captain Roberts completed his water quality analysis, showing contamination of protected watersheds. Documentation is complete, General, Colonel Chen reported. Everything is prepared for simultaneous submission to the appropriate federal agencies. Good, I replied, but we need one more element. I explained the final piece of our strategy, the public component that would prevent the HOA and their political connections from burying the investigation. They believe they control the narrative because they control local influence, I explained. We need to ensure this becomes a matter of public record, not just regulatory enforcement. Lieutenant Martinez, who had served as my communications officer in Europe, smiled for the first time since arriving. I have media contacts at 3 environmental journalism outlets. One call, and they will be very interested in this story. Make the calls, I instructed. But timing is critical. The evidence packages must be delivered to federal offices first, then media notified simultaneously as enforcement begins. No warnings, no leaks. As my team prepared for the counteroffensive, I sat on my porch that evening, maintaining my appearance of defeat. Karen drove by again, waving cheerfully, confident in her victory. I waved back, knowing it would be our last peaceful interaction. That night I walked my property alone, visiting the graves of the 3 calves we had buried after the flood. Justice is coming, I promised them quietly. The battle plan was set. The troops were in position. The enemy remained unaware of the impending engagement. Tuesday morning dawned clear and mild. I sat on my porch with coffee, watching as the sun illuminated my damaged fields. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the operation began. The convoy of unmarked government vehicles appeared first, 5 standard-issue SUVs turning into the main entrance of Whitfield Estates. From my vantage point, I could see Environmental Protection Agency officers in windbreakers methodically exiting their vehicles. Colonel Chen had coordinated their arrival perfectly. Simultaneously, 2 additional vehicles pulled up to the county offices downtown. Army Corps of Engineers representatives, accompanied by federal marshals, would be serving document preservation orders and requesting immediate access to modified permit files. I watched through binoculars as the EPA team established a perimeter around the development's central drainage control station. A landscaped area residents believed was merely decorative, but actually housed the electronic controls for their water diversion system. Within minutes, confusion spread through the development. Residents emerged from colonial-style homes to watch as federal officers began taking soil samples and photographs. I could see Karen Whitfield bursting from her front door, phone already pressed to her ear as she marched toward the officers. Even from a distance, Her body language told the story. Initial confidence in her local connections, followed by growing concern as the officers continued their work unimpeded. When she pointed toward my property, gesturing dramatically, I knew it was time for my entrance. I drove my truck to the development entrance, parking behind the federal vehicles. As I approached on foot, Karen was mid-sentence with the lead investigator. "This is completely unnecessary," she insisted. "Our development has all proper permits and approvals. If there are water issues, you should be investigating that decrepit ranch with its antiquated drainage system." The county commissioner's car pulled in, parking haphazardly. He hurried toward the growing scene, straightening his tie. "What seems to be the problem here? I was not informed of any federal inspection." "That is precisely the problem," came Colonel Chen's voice as she emerged from behind an EPA vehicle. "Federal agencies are not required to notify local officials when investigating potential criminal environmental violations." Karen's face hardened. "Criminal, this is absurd. We have followed every regulation." It was then that I approached, my posture straightening to reveal the military bearing I had carefully concealed during recent interactions. "Four-star General James Harrison," I introduced myself formally to the lead investigator, who immediately straightened his posture through pure instinct. "Former commander of environmental compliance for Allied Forces Europe. I believe you will find the documentation my team has provided quite thorough." The commissioner's face paled as he recognized me, not as the defeated rancher they had been tormenting, but as a military leader with significant federal connections. "General Harrison," he stuttered, "I had no idea your military background was irrelevant to your treatment of my property rights," I finished for him. "Until now." Karen attempted recovery, her voice rising. "This is harassment. You cannot simply bring federal agents into our private community without cause." "The cause," Colonel Chen interjected, "is substantial evidence of Clean Water Act violations, unauthorized modification of protected wetlands, falsification of environmental impact documents, and intentional contamination of a protected watershed." As if on cue, local news vans began arriving, 3 different outlets pulling to the development entrance. Lieutenant Martinez had executed his part of the operation with perfect timing. "Who called the media?" Karen demanded, her composure cracking. "Environmental violations of this magnitude are matters of public interest," I stated simply. The lead EPA investigator addressed the growing crowd of residents. "We request your cooperation as we conduct our investigation. This will include water and soil sampling throughout the community, as well as inspection of all drainage infrastructure." "And while that proceeds," added a federal marshal approaching from the county offices, "we are serving these document preservation orders. No files relating to this development's permits, drainage plans, or environmental impact studies are to be destroyed or altered." Karen's husband arrived, his golf game clearly interrupted. "What is happening here?" he demanded. "Federal environmental investigation," I informed him calmly. "Perhaps you should call Judge Reynolds, though I suspect his judicial authority does not extend to federal environmental law." By mid-afternoon, the full extent of the operation was visible to all. EPA agents collected water samples from pipes protruding illegally onto my property. Corps of Engineers officers documented alterations to natural watersheds. Federal marshals secured county records relating to the development's permits and approvals. Karen Whitfield stood with her husband and the development board members, watching as their carefully constructed scheme unraveled under federal scrutiny. When she attempted to approach the investigators a final time, Colonel Chen intercepted her. "Mrs. Whitfield, any attempt to interfere with this investigation could result in obstruction charges. I strongly suggest you contact your attorney." As I returned to my truck, I passed Corinne. Our eyes met briefly. "This is not over," she hissed. "No," I agreed calmly. "It is just beginning." The federal investigation expanded like ripples in a pond, uncovering layers of corruption and environmental negligence. Within days, news crews from national networks had joined the local media, setting up temporary broadcast positions along the road between my ranch and the development. 2 county officials resigned ahead of indictments, their hasty departures confirming what we had suspected. The engineering firms that had certified the faulty drainage scrambled to reach settlements, distancing themselves from what was quickly becoming a national example of environmental corruption. The development itself now stood partly abandoned. Construction halted on unfinished sections, while completed homes displayed increasing "for sale" signs. Residents fled the mounting special assessments needed to fund the court-mandated drainage reconstruction, estimated at $12 million. Corinne Whitfield's resignation letter to the HOA cited health concerns as her reason for suddenly listing her home and relocating across state lines. Her husband followed shortly after, their hasty departure noted in the local newspaper without editorial comment. The photograph accompanying the article showed federal agents carrying boxes of documents from their home. I declined numerous media interviews, preferring to let the investigation speak for itself. When federal officials delivered a formal apology on my front porch, along with compensation documents that would more than restore my damaged property, I accepted with simple dignity. The system worked as it should, I told the assembled officials. Eventually. More satisfying than the substantial check was the sight of massive equipment arriving to remove all drainage structures along my property line. The court order required complete restoration of natural watershed patterns and environmental remediation of contaminated areas. The most meaningful victory came 3 months after the initial investigation, when I established the Harrison Watershed Conservation Trust using part of my settlement. The trust purchased vulnerable properties around the development, creating a permanent environmental buffer zone protected from future development. "Your father would be proud," Thomas Hargrove, the local attorney, told me as we finalized the trust documents. "He always said this land deserved protection." "It was never just about my property," I explained. "It was about respecting the natural balance. Some things are worth fighting for." The following spring, new calves grazed where floodwaters had once stood. The historic barn, foundations newly reinforced, stood as it had for generations. The fields had recovered, the natural watershed patterns restored. Birds returned to wetlands that had been temporarily diverted but now flowed freely again. One evening, as sunset painted the western sky, a car I did not recognize pulled up to my gate. A young woman emerged, approaching tentatively. "General Harrison, my name is Emily Peterson. We were residents at Whitfield Estates." I invited her onto the porch, offering iced tea as we sat in rocking chairs overlooking the restored fields. "I wanted to apologize," she said after a moment. "Many of us had no idea what was happening with the drainage. The board kept those details from the regular homeowners." "No apology necessary," I assured her. "The responsible parties have been held accountable." She nodded, looking out over the property. Our family moved to the new development on the east side. They had to completely redesign their drainage systems after what happened here. The developer actually advertises their environmental compliance now. I smiled, then something good came from all this. You changed things, she said simply. Not just for your property, but for how development happens in this entire region. After she left, I remained on the porch as evening settled over the land. From my vantage point, I could see the development in the distance, its footprint now bordered by protected wetlands that would never be disturbed again. The battle had been difficult, but the mission was accomplished. I sipped my evening coffee, watching as nature gradually reclaimed the balance that human arrogance had disrupted. In this restoration, I found the peace my retirement had originally promised, not through surrender, but through principled resistance and strategic action. Some battles are fought with weapons and troops. Others are fought with knowledge, connections, and unwavering resolve. Both require the same courage and commitment to justice.